All right, what up, what up, what up? Welcome back to Pnoid News. Man, listen, all right. So y'all know I have some strange views on school shootings and the reasons why they actually happen. And so I kind of wanted to stand here and put forward a little bit of evidence as to my conclusions. So let me basically give you all an overview of how I feel as though these things are actually the reasons why these are happening. So back in the 1980s and 1990s, you had a massive drop in the amount of industrial jobs, right? Where literally over the period of like the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, you had this giant drop of individuals in the blue collar workforce in the Rust Belt that had their jobs exported to places like China, right? And part of the result of this was a giant epidemic of single mothers, right? You know what I'm saying? This is a graph of all the single mothers over time. Right. And so once you had all that, you ended up with zero tolerance laws in schools as a way to deal with the consequences of these actions. Because when you end up taking away dudes' jobs and purposes and they end up getting divorced, you end up with broken homes, you end up with broken children who are highly violent. And to protect the rest of the suburban kids of the managerial elite who run this country and who, are all working in white collar jobs and offices and pay, a bunch of the taxes and things. Christian conservatives or, the liberal elite, as you were, the individuals who read things like the New York Times or the Washington Post, the people who watch CNN and MSNBC and Fox. These individuals here, all right, stood here and begged for help because their kids were getting their asses kicked by us. All right. And I say us because I'm part of this. Now, especially in places like the Rust Belt, Detroit, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, West Virginia, Maryland, New York, right? Western New York, as it were, right? Kentucky, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, places that used to have industry that ended up getting them either A, outsourced, or B, shipped to a different part of the country where labor was cheaper, or C, automated. Now, once all this happened, they ended up passing zero tolerance laws. It says in the United States and Canada, zero tolerance policies have been adopted in various schools and other education venues. Zero tolerance policies in the United States became widespread in 1994 after federal legislation required states to expel for 1 year any student who brought a firearm to school or lose federal funding. Now, these zero tolerance laws, all right, basically have been used against violence and drugs as well, right? So any kid who brings, weed or alcohol or gets in a fight in school, you call the police. And so basically you set a baseline for what happens in an argument between two children inside of a school ground. The baseline is that you're going to bring a man with a badge and a gun into the conversation. So that automatically escalates it to the point of having a man with a badge or a gun in that conversation, right? Or a man with a gun in that conversation. So basically, it's kind of like the same thing when you outlaw drugs or the same things when you outlawed alcohol. You made the consequences bad enough that it became death if something bad happened. So there's been a lot of people who have stood here and done research into this and said there's no concrete evidence that zero tolerance reduces violence, drug abuse by students. Furthermore, school suspension and expulsion result in a number of negative outcomes for both schools and students. The American Bar Association finds that the evidence indicates that the minority children are most likely to suffer the negative consequences of zero tolerance policies. Analysis of the suspension rates of students shows that black females and other racial minorities suspended at a greater rate. The American Psychological Association concluded that the available evidence does not support the use of zero tolerance policies as defined and implemented. There is a clear need to modify such policies, and the policies create a number of unintended negative consequences, including making schools less safe. Basic premise, you know what I'm saying? So everybody kind of actually agrees with me when it comes down to it, right? So these policies are promoted as preventing drug abuse and violence in schools. Critics say zero tolerance policies in schools have resulted in punishments that have been criticized as egregiously unfair against students and teachers, especially in schools with poorly written policies. Consequently, critics describe these policies as zero logic policies because they treat juveniles the way the adults would be treated. or more harshly, given that children are seldom granted full permission to speak up in their own defense to adults with authority over them. Many people have been critical of zero-tolerance policies, claiming that they're draconian, provide little, if any, benefit to anyone, contribute to the overcrowding of the criminal justice system, and or disproportionately target people of color, particularly African-American and Hispanic descent. Right? That's just because they're poor, right? It's a socioeconomic thing, right? So, now, here's the thing. This is the homicide rate, 1900 to 2010. Violence rates kind of, similar. And you see the spike from like 1964 heading up until you get to, like the 1990s, right? In the early 2000s where you had a precipitous decline, right? But the reason why you had this massive spike is because you had a massive amount of outsourcing of jobs, right? It's really simple. When you make people impoverished and then, you charge them for their own welfare, which, by the way, beautiful, right? Like, legit, you could not write a more draconian law, legitimately. Like, if you wanted to stand here, like, it's literally like just going, oh, you're poor? Well, here, take some more debt. Vivictus, right? Legit, that's literally what it's like. It's fucking bananas in the end of the day, right? But this here is actually the reasons why we have violence in schools, is why you have school shootings and things of this nature. Is because we refuse to address the social impacts of feminism, divorce, outsourcing of jobs, the importing of foreign labor, and the destruction of the American workforce. It's that basic. It's that simple. Why is this country no longer working functionally? Because of the fact that you have economically, basically disenfranchised half the country. That's what you've done. And in doing so, right, and going like, oh, well, you should just get an education. Just go to college. Asians go to college, right, and then they do really well here. Nigerians go to college, and then they do really well here. And we go, well, like, we're not interested in trading our culture and our heritage and who we are as people away and getting in all that debt to go get a job that's going to pay us $30,000 a year. Seems like a bad idea, right? Seems like a really shitty idea as a whole. Right, and on top of that, you know what? Like, we'd much rather just have our fucking jobs back, right? I understand that, like, Americans want cheap shit, right? And they know that, like, the number one consumer is females who really don't give a shit about how it's made. I'll give you a first instance. Prada and Nike, right? Two of the largest brands bought by females, right? Are made by slave labor. They don't care how it's made. They don't give a shit. They care that it looks good. That's all that matters to them. Right? So in the end of the day, that's where we end up being. That's what's really going on. And until we address these things, until we have these conversations with ourselves and go, is cheap shit worth it? We're going to continue to have these problems. Look, I'm Tom Pease with Pnoid News. Y'all know the deal. Like, share, and subscribe.